I think our biggest challenge is to educate not only the public, but legislators about really what charter schools are. I just don't think we're there yet with the comfort level. I don't think most legislators, we're human, you know, and we only know what we've been exposed to. And so most legislators on both sides of the aisle, frankly, simply don't know enough about charter schools and the successes that we've seen in other states to put their neck on the line, because we know that it's a very controversial issue in some circles, particularly in the education establishment with KEA and with the School Board Association and with superintendents and so forth. It tends to be controversial, and our challenge is to bring our legislators up to speed so they can make informed decisions on that.
And there seems to be two main objections that I hear. One is that it would take money away from other public schools to these charter schools that would be formed for specific reasons and would allow those charter schools to then get around or not have to adhere to all the state regulations and standards. That's one. The second one is it would ultimately allow those charter schools to pick winners and losers essentially among students. What do you say about those two criticisms?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of merit in either one. You know, let's look at what's going on in our public schools right now. We have magnet schools, and those magnet schools are selecting the best. They're competing for those spots. And I don't hear anything about our tax dollars being drained out of the public school system to go to these magnet schools, yet we're serving a specific population of student in those schools.
Are you saying that those magnet schools are essentially picking winners and losers, picking the best students, cherry picking them out of the other schools and watering those other schools down?
Well, absolutely they are.
Should they be stopped?
And I'm not opposed, absolutely not. Okay. I'm not opposed to that at all. But I want our viewers to understand that charter schools actually are prohibited from selecting the best students from off the top and leaving the rest. We have to take all comers in charter schools. If there are more students that apply than there are seats in the classroom, then we'll have a blind lottery to decide who will attend. And so it simply isn't a valid argument to say that charter schools are going to pick and choose who we're going to take and leave the rest for the other public schools.
Now, one of the advantages that you've talked about is that charter schools would be able to get around these state regulations. What are the maybe one or two most important ones that you think charter schools would be free of that would allow them to do innovative things for students?
Yeah. Well, you know, one would be collective bargaining. We would have to break those collective bargaining agreements in Jefferson County, and that's why JCTA is so adamantly opposed to charter schools. But you know, it's really basic things. It's things like how we may compensate teachers, how we may evaluate those teachers and perhaps tie them closer to student performance. It could be things like curriculum that's used. It could be things like the length of the day, or actually whether or not you go to school on Saturdays. All of these things, the schools, individual schools, would have flexibility to choose what best fits the needs of their own student community.
What would be the effect on students if collective bargaining, for instance, is set aside, or if there's additional flexibility in compensation for teachers? How would that affect students?
Well, what it actually does, it frees teachers up to teach, and it frees administration up to set the parameters on what that school is going to look like. And so I think the students are the ones that ultimately win, but I should say that teachers in good charter schools, teachers also win because they're freed up to do what they do best, and that's teach. They're not tied down with all of the reams of paperwork and hoops they have to jump through. We can cut through a lot of that with charter schools. Now, can I say, Ryan, before, I know you've got another question, but yes, there are additional freedoms and flexibilities that we give charter schools, but in response to that, then we hold them to a higher level of accountability. to a higher level of transparency and performance, so that, yeah, you can have these flexibilities, but you have to perform at these levels.
And that would be written into the legislation, or that would be at the discretion of the Department of Education?
No, it would be written into the legislation, absolutely. We want to make sure that when we bring a charter school online, that we set the bar high. And frankly, that's some of the problems that other states are having that came on board early. You know, 41 states already have charter schools, and some of those early states allowed the flexibility and freedom to teach, but they didn't set that bar high. And so we see some charter schools that haven't performed well. In Kentucky, we can actually, I think, take advantage now of some of the lessons that other states have learned and make sure that we do it the right way.
All right, I just want to make sure on the teachers. Let me ask you point blank, would having that flexibility of not allowing collective bargaining and being able to pay and compensate teachers with more flexibility, would that better enable charter schools to get rid of poor performing teachers?
It would. It would certainly better enable them to do that.
And the evaluations would be based on what? The current evaluations that all teachers have to deal with, or would there be additional evaluation processes under charter schools?
Well, charter schools have to take all the assessment tests that any other school is required to do. But certainly those charter schools could put additional evaluations on their teachers, and many times they do tie them to their tests to see how they're performing. Ryan, I need to...
Are you comfortable with that? Because there's a lot of concern among teachers that being tied to their students' test performance, you know, if they happen to get you know, just a bad crop of students that one year, that puts that teacher at a disadvantage. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, if it's a longitudinal test, so that we know where that student was when we got them, and then we bring them a year's worth of growth that year, then we're not going to be punished if they were behind when we got them. So I think it's important that those things. But Ryan, you need to understand, and our viewers need to understand, that teachers can collectively bargain in a charter school. In my legislation, they can do that. We simply start all over. Any existing contracts would have to be broken, but once you're in a charter school, you can still collectively bargain. But obviously it's going to be a different environment, so some of those things that they bargain for will be different than perhaps what's going on right now.
All right, last thing, Representative Montell, there was a bill that passed that Representative Carl Rollins, the Education Committee Chairman in the House, passed that was called Districts of Innovations, and it does allow some school districts to free themselves temporarily of state regulations. Do you see that as an incremental move to charter schools, or do you see that as the House being able to say, look, we did this, let's see how this works, we're not going to deal with charter schools for a long time? Well,
I called the bill Charter Light when I made comments on the House floor about it. I think it's a move in the right direction. I think what Chairman Rollins was trying to do was give our public schools the ability to innovate without allowing charters to come in, so they don't lose the control. You know, the problem is we're in a culture inside that huge establishment, and I think the bill says 70% of any staff within a building has to vote on any of the innovations. It's going to be really hard, I think, for our schools to really and truly bring innovation into it. Now, there's going to be some things that happen, and I'm for it. You know, I'm for improving all of our public education, and people should understand. You know, when I think about charter schools, I like to reference the old Rocky movie when Rocky talks about Adrian filling his gaps. Remember that? She fills my gaps. You know, there's a lot of good stuff in our public schools and a lot of great teachers. We don't want to undo that, but there are gaps where we're not reaching a significant number of our students. And so charter schools would need to come alongside our traditional public schools and fill those gaps. It's all about public schools, and it's all about our children.
All right, well, Representative Montell, our very first Rocky reference on Pure Politics. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ryan.